Hello and welcome to 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we are attempting to find 1000 actually fun books. And this week we're reviewing The Second Mrs. Astor by Shana Abe. And normally I hold up a copy of the book and show it to you, but I read a digital copy. My library only had an ebook, so I have nothing to show you. But I will find a photo and stick it right here of Mrs. Astor. Her name is Madeline. This is from the Wikipedia. And so there you go. You can see what she looked like. And so when I introduced the book last week, I was saying what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be, because this is a historical fiction, these are real people that really existed. I thought it was going to be starting at the Titanic disaster and then moving forward. Well, it turns out that I was wrong. So here is a summary of the plot. It focuses on Madeline, who, in age about 17, meets the wealthiest man in America, a recently divorced Mr. Astor, who is almost 40, and they start courting. Definitely courting, not dating. This was taking place in about 1910, so this is a very different method of getting to know each other. Lots of flowers and dances and polite, greetings in very chaperoned conditions. So they meet and decide to get married and do so. And so she is about 18 when they get married, and then go on a honeymoon. And part of their honeymoon, it's very extended, it seems like it takes months, is to go to Europe, and they go to Egypt, and then on the way home on the Titanic disaster happens, and Madeline survives, and John Jacob Astor does not. And then finally the end of the book is kind of the funeral and very little kind of after the funeral. So it really doesn't give you and then what happened. It's just up until that point, and then that's kind of the end of the story. So that's a summary of a plot, and it was an excellent book. I really liked it. The author did a fantastic job. You can tell it was very well researched. I really liked that. Lots of little stories that I'm pretty sure, I haven't researched it myself, so being able to tell you whether it's actually happened and all the details, I couldn't say, but it seems like it was very well researched. And it has lots of interesting little details. For example, they have a dog. It was Mr. Astor's dog, then became their dog, and on their trip to Egypt, they did a cruise down the Nile. And at one of their stops, they lost the dog. And this is a beloved dog. They were quite distraught. They spent 4 days there, and because he's so wealthy, they were able to get the river cruise to basically hold up. You're going to wait for me because I said so. Let me toss some money at you. And they couldn't find the dog. So eventually they left, but he posted a huge reward for the dog. They continued on their cruise. And then on the way back down the Nile, because they had to return down the river, they encountered people who had found their dog. And this is a funny little story. It had a lot of impact in the novel, but, it probably is true that they really did lose their dog in a city in Egypt and then found it like 5 days later. People had found their dog for the reward. It's just it's an interesting story, I think. And it goes to show the kind of research that went on behind it to have come up with that. It sounds like there was a lot of other research with a lot of historical backing. Like a lot of the scenes have to do with photos that are probably in archived newspapers. And that's why the scene is in the book, is probably because this article or this newspaper or this event happened, and that's how the author knew about it. And then she just filled in all the details, how people were feeling and the weather and what they thought and their dialogue, things like that. And she did a fantastic job. You really end up liking these people. That's one of the highlights of this book, are the people. Madeline is a very good character. She's not a perfect person, but she's a very real person. And she tries to be a kind person, even to people who are not kind to her. She attempts to be a good person to them. And Mr. Astor, our really wealthy person, does not come across as a caricature either. He is nervous and awkward and doesn't always read his wife's mind, and he's a divorcee, so apparently there was something going on there, although it doesn't go into any details about what was up with that divorce. And the author, in fact, seems very determined, shockingly, to steer away from scandal, because most books that I would consider, talk about a famous person like, an old English queen or whatever, they would find a little hint of scandal and like blow it up to as big as possible. I mean, I've seen enough of the History Channel to know how that works. You find a little detail that, this could be, this could make the people look like horrible people. Let's dwell on that and make it bigger. Instead, this author does not do that. She seems to go out of her way to make it pretty obvious that all the blown up rumors out there that might be around this couple really are nothing. And in fact, you can see where she could have gone to huge lengths to expand on scandal. For example, it's pretty obvious with the age difference. Madeline is 17 when they meet, 18 when they get married, and Mr. Astor is nearly 40. I mean, that's a huge age difference. And he's only 6 months divorced by the time when he meets her. I mean, that seems a little bit awkward. I mean, is she a gold digger? Is he a cradle robber? I mean, come on. You could see how society at large would, turn their nose up at that. And it was very scandalous too, that a divorcee is getting remarried. They actually had some problems in the story of finding a clergyman to wed them, because a lot of priests would be like, no, I'm not gonna, it's bad enough that you're divorced. I'm certainly not gonna encourage you to get remarried. I mean, how horrible is that? So you can kind of see how this scandalous thing could have been made into a bigger deal that the author could have twisted this into kind of selfish, nasty people. But instead, she was very kind to the people that she's writing about. They come across as good people, as gentle, as just fallible but human, real people. So she does a good job at that. I would expand on that by saying there really isn't a bad guy in this story. Surprisingly enough, again, because you could have made, one of the other society people, because they kind of snubbed Madeline at first. You could have made one of those people a really much bigger part of the story and into a real bad guy and had all these awkward, uncomfortable encounters or something like that. And the author doesn't do that. There's minor little things, sitting next to somebody who says something kind of sharp or pointed or whatever, but it doesn't linger, and this character doesn't keep coming back and back or something like that. There's a pervasive cloud of kind of isolation and a lack of privacy that hovers around Madeline and Mr. Astor, but it's not too overwhelming of the story. I mean, it's constantly there as a shadow. The media itself and the public, who all want a piece of the Astors, do kind of be that pervasive background bad guy that are constantly trying to infringe on their privacy and get their slice of information about them. But it is, unfortunately, a very real feel to it. I mean, it's certainly not isolated to the 1910s. Anybody who's famous movie star today, you can see how they have difficulties maintaining privacy for their family time or whatever. A paparazzi is going to go in and take a picture through their window, or the public is going to act like they know them or something like that. I mean, it happens today. So it's a very real, but again, it's a cloud that overshadows them, that's constantly there, but not totally present all the time in their immediate story. Okay, Vincent. So Mr. Astor, previously married, he had a son who is pretty much the same age as Madeline. I mean, that's kind of awkward when your stepmom is the same age you are. Yeah, he was not a happy camper. He did not like Madeline. And the book, again, could have made him out to a one dimensional bad guy. But the author eschews caricatures. And instead, it feels very real. He is upset at what his father is doing, probably thinks Madeline is this nasty gold digger, but he's cold toward her in the couple of scenes that he's there with her, but is not cruel. He is there later on in the very end of the book. It basically says that he never ended up liking Madeline, but they got along okay, if that makes sense. And that's basically how it treats it. It's not, he's not the bad guy either. So anyway, they do a good job with the characters. The relationships, on the other hand, that are positive are really great. Like Madeline's relationship with her family, especially her sister, seem very close and loving. I mean, there's no jealousy depicted there, that Madeline is marrying into this really wealthy family ahead of her older sister. And it's just like, yeah, that's fine. I'm happy for you kind of attitude, which is really nice to see that kind of attitude. So the relationships are mostly positive. But real. Like the relationship between Madeline and Mr. Astor is generally positive, but it's not perfect. There are times when Mr. Astor does things that Madeline isn't too thrilled about, or times where Madeline is kind of a little manipulative. But it never overshadows their character as being good people. Okay, there's very little I didn't like about this, but I will mention two very minor things. One of which is it's not big in dialogue, and I think mostly that's because the author is trying to be as authentic as possible. And because there isn't a lot of authentic dialogue that we have historically between Madeline and her husband, that the author just didn't put a whole lot in. They just don't talk a lot to each other. We have a lot of Madeline's thoughts and feelings, which obviously the author had to make up, but we don't have a lot of dialogue, conversation between the two of the characters, and which comes across as a little bit awkward because it's kind of like, how do you know each other? You never talk to each other. And that's obviously not really the case. It just feels that way. So that's one minor quibble. And it is it's mostly a romance book. I would actually kind of say that, although not like a romance book like the genre of romance. It's definitely not that. It's a historical fiction. But their relationship is the focus of this book. From the day they met to the day of the Titanic takes like 2/3 of the book. And then the events of the Titanic take the last third with a minor epilogue. So it's all about their relationship. That is what this is about. So, and because it is a husband and wife and everything, it's a romance relationship. But it's not a weird, romance genre. It's just real people being real, getting to know each other, getting married, going on a honeymoon and having, the adventures that happened on their trip, and then the tragedy that happens afterwards. Anyway, and this brings me to my other second quibble, and that would be the ending. It feels like, okay, it ends almost right after the funeral. And I kind of felt like, well, okay, what happened? What did Madeline do after this? Did she take charge of her husband's business? Did she lose it all in the stock market? I mean, what ended up happening to her and her son? Because she was pregnant on the Titanic. What ended up happening to this family? I don't know. So, I guess I could go look it up on Wikipedia, but it's just one of those things where I'm like, it would have been nice if they had a nice epilogue that said, and she lived happily ever after, or something. And you just kind of got a satisfying ending. Instead, it just feels like it kind of ended, okay, well, the relationship is over, but her life continues, so what happened? So I didn't love that kind of almost abrupt feeling of the ending. That would be my my two quibbles there. The not enough dialogue and kind of the ending was but it doesn't detract from the overall great story. This really was wonderful. The characters, the research, the relationships, the events were all interesting and engaging. All the things that happened to them, there was a lot going on. The event of the Titanic itself, so it is a tragedy, but it's not really a tearjerker. The author did a pretty good job of distancing you enough through Madeline being kind of in shock. It was almost a haze, like this happened and then this happened and how did this happen even? Like her being rescued, it almost felt like she blacked out between one moment she's standing in ankle deep water because of the water in the bottom of the boat, and the next minute she's being lifted up onto the boat, and the next minute she's waking up on the rescue ship, just because of the shock that she's in throughout the whole thing. And this does feel real. You can see how just the horror of the magnitude of this tragedy would have made somebody feel this way, especially a very wealthy, not used to hardships woman. But it does make the reader more distant from that tragedy, so it's not a tearjerker. I will say also that these are wealthy people. I mean, Mr. Astor was the wealthiest man in America, and Mrs. Astor, Madeline, started out as an heiress already. She was already an heir of millions of dollars. So they both were wealthy, and their entire lives were, dripping gold, so to speak. And but fortunately, it doesn't. They do not come across as pretentious or the kind of people that you hate because of their wealth. They're just, I'm wealthy and this is just the way life is. I mean, they're just used to it, so it doesn't stand out as much. Like at the very end, she gave the captain of the ship that rescued them a solid gold watch. And she felt like it was a trinket. I mean, it was not her life that they gave her was worth way more than this solid piece of gold. And it comes across not as, well, I'm so wealthy I can just throw money away, but like she realized that the wealth she had isn't really valuable. And that actually comes across quite a few times in this. Like she'll go into a room and notice how gaudy the room is. I mean, it's dripping gold, and it made her uncomfortable. And this doesn't come across as weird because it's her being, it's not a commentary on wealth. It is a commentary that wealth does not bring happiness. It does not bring comfort. It does not bring beauty even sometimes. It just is. And I thought that was a good way of handling their wealth in this. It doesn't come across as weird. They're just real people. They just happen to have money. All right. I think that's everything I had to say, except for it was 2 stars, 2 thumbs up. I mean, I guess I could say 5 stars or 10 stars or whatever, but 2 thumbs up. This is definitely going on my 1,000 book list. I highly encourage people to read it, especially if you like that kind of story. The non-action, non-drama. I mean, there's not a lot of the, like social drama or whatever, or relationship drama. Instead, it is a relationship. 2 people growing together, a historical commentary on 2 people and their lives. And I thought the author did a fantastic job. So, highly recommend it. All right, moving on to part 2. Part 2 is my second book, and I chose a science fiction, because I haven't done one of those yet. John Ringo's Live Free or Die. This is the first of a series. My husband really recommended this book. He really likes it. My dad read it and just thought it was okay. So we'll see what I think about it. And what I know about it is aliens have come to Earth, discovered Earth, and were not impressed. Until they discovered maple syrup. And then they were suddenly very impressed. So that's all I really know about this. My husband calls this the maple syrup science fiction book. And so we'll try that next. I hope you join me. And thank you for watching.